So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kira Wilkins, and I'm the conference manager for the International Surface event. And I want to take this moment to thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule to join us on the webinar today. The webinar series is an extension of the International Surface event, the 2018 educational program. To get future updates on all our events and programs, visit our Twitter page at TISE_education or at TISE events for more details. We hope you will continue to join us and share your feedback on the program. Our presenter today is Tema Frank. Tema is a customer experience and digital marketing pioneer. In 2001, she founded the world's first company that tested both online and offline customer service. Using social media techniques before social media existed, she developed a panel of 75,000 mystery shoppers worldwide. She is the author of the best-selling book, People Shock: The Path to Profits When Customers Rule, which was a finalist for the Best Book Award in 2016. And she hosts the Frank Reactions podcast on customer experience. Our clients have included small businesses through to Fortune 500 companies like Bank of America. Tema speaks, teaches, and consults internationally. The topic today is the secret to turning complaining customers into raving fans, and it's a preview of her full 90-minute session at TISE. Welcome, Tema.
Thank you. It's great to be here. So I want to start by telling you a true story. A few years ago, my family and I decided that we were going to relocate to southern France for a year. And so we needed to find housing in or near this town. It's a town called Pau. It's a beautiful area. And what we found is that to rent housing, pretty much the entire rental market was controlled by realtors. And those realtors, many had websites, but they were really bad. Many of them, most of them had no email information. You had to fill in forms, and often those forms insisted on a phone number, but would not accept a phone number that was formatted like a Canadian or an American phone number. It had to be a French phone number. So it was getting really, really frustrating. Even those that did accept a Canadian phone number, I'm based in Canada, although I travel a fair bit, as you can tell. But even those that did accept our phone number, most of them never called us back. So I was starting to get kind of panicked about what was going to happen. Finally, one day, one of them did call me back. And when I explained our situation, he said to me, "You only want to rent for 1 year?" And I said, yeah. And he said, for less than 3 years, nobody will talk to you. Well, at this point, I started to really panic, which it kind of explained why nobody had been calling us back, but there was no way we could rent for 3 years. So I thought, okay, I got to think outside the box here. And I started looking at bed and breakfasts, and I found this one. The people who ran this place were absolutely amazing to deal with. Their customer service was magnificent. Now, it was way beyond the budget we planned on spending, and it was at the top of a 1.5 mile long, very steep, zigzaggy hill. So it had its disadvantages for sure, but because they were so awesome, they answered every question we could possibly have, including some we hadn't thought to ask. They sent us contact information for previous tenants or renters. They were just so incredibly accommodating that, of course, we did sign a lease to spend a year there. They didn't have room for us in their facility for the first couple of weeks, so they put us down the road with friends of theirs who had an equally lovely home. Now, it doesn't look quite as dramatic in this picture, but it had an equally beautiful view, and inside, arguably, this one was even nicer. But the attitude of the owners was so completely different. You walk into the unit, and the first thing you see is this huge binder full of rules about how to use the place. It had a detailed inventory down to the spoon and fork and said, you know, we're going to check this when you leave, and if anything's missing or damaged, we're going to charge you, blah, blah, blah. So the result was this place sits empty most of the time. whereas this one is booked months in advance. And if you're ever going to France, I will let you know about this one so you can get your booking in. It's amazing. But the reason I'm telling you these things is because customer service makes a huge difference. And it's not just in the hospitality sector that it matters. And one of the things that I hear often when I deal with people, for instance, in residential construction or in road work or anything like that is for two things. One, everybody already knows about us, so we don't need to bother with marketing and we don't really need to care what people are looking up or saying. And the second thing is, well, in my business, it's all about price. We just answer RFPs. But the reality is, even with an RFP, it's not just about price, it's about value. And the human relationships that you will have formed and the quality of service that you've delivered in the past are going to affect the perceptions of value. Now, the odds are that your company's customer experience is not as good as you think it is. So I want to ask you a little question here, and you can just type it in. I guess you've got a chat box where you can type it in. 80% of companies think that they deliver great customer experience. I'd like to know from you what percent of customers you think agree. And I'll just pause here for a moment to give you a chance to type in some guesses. And Carol, if you, as you see them, maybe you can read some out.
Yeah, so I have 35% coming in. Someone says 60. Another 10%.
Well, the last one's getting pretty close. It's actually 8%. So that is an enormous gap. And it means that most companies are massively overconfident in the type of service they deliver. And, you know, that's natural, I guess, because when people leave you, they don't generally tell you about it, and they don't generally tell you why. So it's easy to be overconfident. Often companies will have a customer experience problem brewing that they're not even aware of. So sometimes they are aware through fairly obvious signs, like complaints have been going up or requests for refunds or returns. If sales have gone down or flatlined or the sales cycle is increasing, that may be an indication of a problem. Often people convince themselves it's just the economic cycle, and certainly that can have an impact. But companies that are outstanding at customer experience don't feel that impact nearly as much, even in a recession. But there are also some less obvious signs that you need to be aware of that could indicate that you have a customer service or customer experience problem brewing. One of them, for instance, is production delays. So if the products that you manufacture and ship are often delayed, or if the stuff that you get in and then resell is often delayed, those delays, of course, will translate through to the kind of service that you are then delivering to your customers. If there's poor maintenance going on, that's going to lead to more equipment failures, more delays, poor products and returns. So those things will also lead to customer experience problems. Poor tracking of invoices, both the issuing of them and the payment of them. If nobody's taking proper care of that, and it's a really common problem in really small businesses, I've been guilty of it myself sometimes, but if you're not paying attention to it, you'll run into cash flow problems. And if you've got cash flow problems, you're going to run into problems in your ability to offer great service. If you find that it's getting harder and harder to recruit great staff, that may well be an indication that your company's reputation isn't as good as you think it is. If you're finding that more and more employees are calling in sick more often, or doing what we call presenteeism, which is they show up but they're really not doing anything, again, those types of things tend to indicate that there are problems, and if your employees aren't happy, they're not going to be delivering great service to your customers. And then there are two things that could be going on in your executive suite which could be causing problems that ultimately shower down to customer service. So one is, if there's a lot of disagreement at the top level in your organization, those people are going to be translating that view through to the people who work for them, and you won't have the sort of cooperation that's necessary to really serve customers well. On the other hand, if there's no disagreement in the executive suite, that's also a problem. Because if there's no disagreement, chances are people are afraid to tell the boss what's really going on. And it's very easy to get removed from what's really going on, especially when you're surrounded by people who are afraid of you. If you don't know what's going on, you're not going to be delivering the greatest of service. And you know, a lot of companies are frustrated by the thought of having to invest in customer experience because it takes a little bit of time. There are a ton of studies, though, that show that the return on investment is incredible from this investment. This is just one example of a study where they compared a $100 investment in the US Standard & Poor 500 list, which invested in 2000, by 2012 would have actually gone down to $93, versus an investment in the American Customer Satisfaction Index stock portfolio of companies that had a good reputation in terms of customer satisfaction. Those would have gone up to almost $500 from that initial $100 investment. So it's not just a feel-good thing. This makes strong economic sense. The overall marketplace that you're operating in has changed dramatically in recent years, and more change is coming. The amount of competition that most companies face has massively changed and become global. So it used to be that people would deal with their local company because they knew about them and they were easy to find out about, and they were easy to get to and go ask questions. But now people know about so many more competitors and so many more options, and customers are much better informed, so they can ask much tougher questions. Second thing is there's digital disruption. I mean, we've all heard about companies like Uber and Airbnb, which totally overturned their industries, but it's happening in the building industry too. If you haven't heard, for example, about Build Direct, it's a company based in Canada but becoming quite international, where they decided they were going to skip the 5 layers of middlemen between manufacturers of, for example, flooring surfaces and the ultimate customers, and they sell direct. And this company has just been growing like crazy. And so they're disrupting an industry that poses a real threat potentially to you and your business. And the third thing that's really changed is the power in the customer's hands thanks to social media. So if people are unhappy, they can share that information far and wide really quickly. On the other hand, the good news is if they're happy, people like to share that information too. And it's not just on Facebook or Twitter that people are sharing. They are sharing all over, and there are more and more well-known specialized sites for reviews of people in any particular industry. So it's not something you can ignore, and it's not something you can pretend will go away or doesn't matter. It really, really does. As this company found out a couple of years ago, Union Street Guest House was getting annoyed because customers were, in their minds, saying unfair things in their reviews on social media. And for sure, sometimes customers do say unfair things. But what these guys decided to do is they were going to charge they were going to charge people leaving reviews $500 if they left a negative review. And they actually tried to do that. Well, very quickly, they were flooded with negative reviews, and it didn't take long before they had actually gone out of business. You can't just try and bash people over the head, even if what you think they're saying is unfair. So I'd like, again, just to take a couple of moments for you to put down in the chat box, what are some of the things that you think stop your organization from offering always great customer experiences? So I'll give you a moment or two for that. And again, Carol, maybe if you can read some stuff as it comes in, that would be great.
Okay. Lack of onboarding guidance is one that just came in. There's a couple. Hold on. Unrealistic expectations.
Okay.
Is another. That's what I have in so far. There's another one. Poor leadership.
Okay. Well, I want you to keep thinking about these as we go through the rest of this webinar, because there are a lot of things that are stopping companies. So what I want to discuss for the rest of this webinar is 3 things. One is what I call people shock and what it is and why it matters to you. The second is my treatment for people shock, which is what I call the 3P profit formula and how that can help you. And finally, where can you start? So people shock is basically a term that I coined to deal with the fact that We are in an era where more and more is being done through technology and done without human interaction. So Amazon is literally, for instance, doing drone deliveries of products in some areas. People's fridges are ordering more milk when they run out. Less and less is being done through human interaction. And when that happens, what the result is the little bit that's left for human interaction becomes more important than ever before. It's something that becomes absolutely vital in distinguishing your company from every other company. Because if they're not getting better from you than they can get from an automated service, why would they deal with you? And it's not just in the consumer world, the business to consumer sales, where this is an issue. Even in the business to business world, 3/4 of all buyers actually start their research online, and that number is going up. The millennials are now getting to be the largest group of buyers in corporate America. And these people grew up researching things, Googling things. They don't want to start with a phone call. So if your organization is still relying on phone calls to get business, you're going to fall way behind. Everybody now starts online, and they've had their expectations set by companies like Amazon. So even though you're not selling books or whatever, they're expecting the same kind of service levels that they're getting from companies like Amazon. So to close that huge gap between what the customer is expecting and what your company is delivering, I would recommend that you take a look at what I call the 3P profit formula. So the three elements of that are the promise, the people, and the processes. And they all interact with one another. If you get them right, you can create these really great customer experiences that are consistently good, and that will lead to higher profits and long-term sustainability and success for your organization. So the first P is the promise, and the promise is basically your brand. So when you see this logo, what does it bring to mind? Well, I would be willing to bet that for 99% of you, the word that pops into mind is safety. And Volvo has done an absolutely outstanding job of branding themselves around safety. Their cars may not look the sexiest, but you know that if you buy a Volvo, it's going to be a safe car. That is their promise to you. This logo sends a different message. Their cars might not be the safest in the world, but they're powerful, or they're cool to look at, or it's fast. These are all brand attributes that Ferrari has cultivated. So every brand has its attributes. The thing is, you've got to make sure that your promise is rooted in your values and that those values follow through in your organization. So several of you, I suspect, remember the emissions scandal with Volkswagen last year, when they essentially broke their promise to customers. And that resulted in an absolutely enormous backlash that has cost them billions of dollars. And as a matter of fact, their stock market price still hasn't even come close to recovering where it was before that. So the promise is basically your brand. It encapsulates your values, and all of that leads to how the customers perceive you and how the public perceives you, which ultimately leads to your brand's performance. The other great thing about promise is if you've got a really strong, clear promise, then it gives your staff guidance for their own behavior, and it gives them a filter if they have to make a decision when the boss isn't around. It helps them know what would my boss do in this situation? How does it fit with our promise? The second P is people, and obviously this is a huge one, as I explained when I talked about what People Shock is all about. And there are two basic categories of people. There are the internal ones and the external ones. So some of them are pretty obvious: employees, customers, prospects, and the people who influence all of those. Those I think are pretty obvious, but we often forget about this other huge group of people who also affect your brand. So for instance, if you're not on great terms with your suppliers and they run into a shortage of supply, guess who's not getting it? That would be the company that they're not on good terms with. So all of these different types of players and people, you need to develop those strong human relationships with and treat them really well, because in a sense, they're all customers, they're all affecting your brand. So what do customers want? fundamentally, there are 5 things that they want. They want empathy. They want to feel that you really get them. You understand them. You understand their situation. You feel their pain if they're feeling pain. They want you to be transparent and honest with them. So if there are delays, let's say, don't just pretend, yeah, everything's fine. Tell them about the delays. Tell them what you're going to do about it. Keep them informed. If you do that, you're going to have a lot less backlash because of the delays. They want to be treated fairly, and fairly doesn't necessarily mean equally. Fairly, you can set a rule that says nobody's allowed to return a product, but somebody who has to return it because the person who bought it was just hit by a truck and died, it's not fair if you treat them in the same way as you treated everybody else. So you've got to think about their situation. If they have problems, they want it to be able to be resolved quickly and easily. And finally, it sort of ties back to the empathy thing. They want to be heard by you, and they want to be valued. They don't want to be treated as just another customer number. Now, employees are a pretty critical element of serving those customers. And over again, the research shows very clearly you can force a McDonald's employee to put a smile on their face and say, have a nice day. But if it isn't heartfelt, customers know that. So you've got to make sure that your employees are happy as well. So what do they want? They basically want the same kinds of things as your customers want. They want empathy, and they want to be working in a good environment. They want you to be open and honest with them. They want to be treated fairly. I think the one difference is where in the customer chart, we said they wanted quick and easy problem resolution. Your employees actually want challenge. And I know a lot of people think, nah, my employees are lazy. They're not. If you've motivated them right, they are eager to take on challenges and to do what they can to make your organization a much more successful organization. Because the fact is, when they start with you, they really want to do a good job, and they want to satisfy your customers and prospects, unless you've done things that really have turned them off. So the employee side is a huge part, and that's something that my co-presenter Brian Greckin and I will be talking about more in our presentation at the TICE event, which if you're going to that, it's going to be January 29th at 3:30. And we'll have more time there to get into a little more detail on this because it's absolutely critical. And then the third P is the process, and that's where a lot of organizations typically fall down on the job. And often it's just because things change over time and you haven't taken the time to reassess your processes. So for example, I remember one company that I interviewed where they were a manufacturer and they kept complaining. They had this one fantastic client, but they said, it's so annoying because they make us punch a hole in the corner of this particular piece of equipment, and it's just annoying to have to do it, but whatever, they're a great customer, will do it for them. Then when the customer was interviewed, the customer said, we love dealing with this supplier, but it's so annoying that they keep punching this damned hole into the corner. But, we put up with it because we like dealing with them. Well, on further investigation, it turned out that the need for the hole in the corner was based on equipment that existed 10 years earlier. And that equipment was long gone, but no one had ever stopped and reviewed, do those processes from 10 years ago still make sense? So part of the way to find that out is by getting to know your customers better. And the customer journey and what we call customer journey mapping, and I know this can be a scary chart and the reality can be way more complex and confusing than this, but it really starts from the time somebody starts thinking they might want a product or service like what you offer, right through to them researching it, communicating with you, hopefully buying from you, and then dealing with service afterwards, and ultimately telling friends. This is just one example, but the key is you want to start with customer research. You want to find out what is really going on in the minds of the customers. Who are they? Why are they buying from you? Where do they interact with you? How do they interact with you? You need to find out all these things so that you can make sure that your processes work for them. So once you understand what they're looking for and how and where they look for it, you want to see how does that line up with what we do internally. Now, I don't know how many of you recognize what this device in the picture is. I suspect some of you do, but a lot of you don't. And it comes about from talking to employees. So there was a fellow I interviewed who was a brand new supervisor who started the job saying, I don't know a lot about supervising, but I know I don't want to be like the supervisors I've had. And one of the things that he started doing is at the beginning of each day, they have a 5-minute huddle, 5 minutes only, standing up. Is there anything that happened yesterday that's going to affect today that we should all know about? Second question is, has anybody got any ideas of ways we could do things better? And, at first it took a while for people to start chipping in, but they did. And one guy who hadn't said anything for the first few months finally said, we have to calibrate this particular piece of equipment. And to do that, we have to stick our heads basically into a box, which is lit from the shop floor. And he said, it would be a lot easier to do this if we had a flashlight in there. Something so blindingly obvious, but no one had ever said it before. The people in supervisory roles weren't doing that job, so they didn't think about it. As soon as that guy said it, the supervisor ran across the street to the hardware store, bought a bunch of these, which are in fact industrial flashlights, brought them back, and what happened? Not only was the employee happy that their idea was acted on, but they were able to do their work quickly, more accurately, and errors went down. Everybody was happier. They were happier, the customer was happier, and other parts of the organization, finance was happier because it was costing them less to run this process. So ask your frontline employees and be sure that you review your processes on a regular basis. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about some of that and the journey mapping and how to do it in our presentation on January 29th. And there's, I gather, a code number for that. It's MN, as in Monday, 25. So you can look for that. So how do you start? Well, the best way to start, honestly, is with a CEO who really understands the importance of customer experience. Really, your CEO should be your core engagement officer. It should be the person who's getting everybody excited and on the same side and working together as a team. And I know that that can be challenging. So how do you even engage your CEO if your CEO isn't there yet? Well, 3 things really help do that. Well, really, it's one thing. It's the voice of the customer and bringing that voice to the top level. And there are a few ways you can do that. I don't know how many of you have watched the show Undercover Boss, where a boss will put on makeup and wigs or whatever and pretend to be someone else and go work in their own organization. Well, you don't have to wait for a TV show to do that. You can go undercover in your organization, or if it's too small and you can't, you can hire an outside company that can help you with that. And get feedback. Find out what's really going on the front lines, because the further you are from the front lines, the less you know what's actually going on. So if you can get your boss out there on the front lines, that's really going to help, because he or she will hear directly from customers. Another thing that makes a huge difference is talk to the people who answer your phones. Often, if it's a larger organization, there are call recordings, and you can play some of those recordings for your senior executives. It's so impactful when they hear the actual words of customers, and instead of just seeing charts or graphs. Afterwards, you back it up with the charts and graphs, but let them hear the words. And the third element is everybody in your senior executive team has to be meeting with clients regularly, including former clients. So every week, at least once, you should be going out there, if you're at that senior level, sitting down with a client or a former client and finding out what's going on in their world. How are things changing? How have they experienced dealing with your organization? You want to build that relationship so it's so strong they feel comfortable being open with you. You'll get so much insight. And again, hearing the actual voice of the customer will make it easier to sell people in your organization that this is really important stuff. So that said, I told you at the beginning, we talk about how to go from angry, complaining customers to raving fans. And this gives you a quick little overview, I guess, of how to do it. But fundamentally, the key to doing it is customer experience. And if you can get that right, that will be a competitive advantage that very few of your competitors manage to compete with you effectively on, and you will get more business and become more profitable. I'd be happy to answer questions now.
Okay, well, thank you, Tima. Really appreciate your time today. The information you're sharing can be used with in all business facets. Doesn't necessarily have to be the flooring industry.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to give this opportunity, if you have a few minutes, if you're listening and you have a few minutes and you have a couple questions, you can either raise your hands and I'll unmute you and you can ask the questions directly, or you can type your questions in the question box and I will read it out loud. In the meantime, while I give you a few minutes to do that, just wanted to remind you that you can get more information, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, at any of our social media pages, or on our website. So it doesn't look like we have any questions coming in, but I just want to say thank you so much, Tima. I really enjoyed the presentation, and hopefully everyone on the joining us today will be able to stop by and see your presentation. We have a few people. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to say I really hope so. And honestly, if you've got any questions, do feel free to connect with me. I've also got a bi-weekly podcast that I do where I talk about these types of issues. And on the right of the screen, you can see the cover of the book that I wrote about this topic as well. So really happy to meet you, I hope, at the event and to answer any questions you have now or later.
Okay. So, with that, I am going to bring the webinar to a close. And again, just wish you all a very, very good day. Thanks, Tama.
Thank you.